Christianity in the 4th century was dominated in its early stage by Constantine the Great and the First Council of Nicaea of 325, which was the beginning of the period of the first 7 Ecumenical Councils, and in its late stage by the Edict of Thessalonica of 380, which made Nicene Christianity the state church of the Roman Empire. Christian persecutions. With Christianity the dominant faith in some urban centers, Christians accounted for approximately 10% of the Roman population by 300. According to some estimates, Roman Emperor Diocletian launched the bloodiest campaign against Christians that the empire had witnessed. The persecution ended in 311 with the death of Diocletian. The persecution ultimately had not turned the tide on the growth of the religion. Christians had already organized to the point of establishing hierarchies of bishops. In 301 the Kingdom of Armenia became the first nation to adopt Christianity. The Romans followed suit in 380. Roman Empire, under Galerius. In April 311, Galerius, who had previously been one of the leading figures in the persecutions, issued an edict pg the practice of the Christian religion under his rule. From 313 to 380, Christianity enjoyed the status of being a legal religion within the Roman Empire. It had not become the sole authorized state religion. However, it gradually gained prominence and stature within Roman society. After halting the persecutions of the Christians, Galerius reigned for another 2 years. He was then succeeded by an emperor with distinctively pro-Christian leanings, Constantine the Great. Constantine I. Christian sources record that Constantine experienced a dramatic event in 312 at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, after which Constantine claimed the emperorship in the West. According to these sources, Constantine looked up to the sun before the battle and saw a cross of light above it, and with it the Greek words epsilon nu tau omicron upsilon tau omega nu iota kappa alpha. Constantine commanded his troops to adorn the shields with a Christian symbol, and thereafter they were victorious. How much Christianity Constantine adopted at this point is difficult to discern. Most influential people in the empire, especially high military officials, were still pagan, and Constantine's rule exhibited at least a willingness to appease these factions. Roman legalization. The accession of Constantine was a turning point for the Christian Church. After his victory, Constantine supported the Church financially, built various basilicas, granted privileges to clergy, promoted Christians to high-ranking offices, and returned property confiscated during the reign of Diocletian. In 313 Constantine issued the Edict of Milan reaffirming the tolerance of Christians and returning previously confiscated property to the churches. Under the influence of Constantine I, the Christian movement gradually underwent its major transformation from a previously underground and even criminal movement into an officially sanctioned religion of first rank within the Roman Empire. Constantine I chose to take a lead role in much of this transformation. In 316 he acted as a judge in a North African dispute concerning the Donatist controversy. More significantly, in 325 he summoned the Council of Nicaea, effectively the first ecumenical council, to deal mostly with the Arian controversy, but which also issued the Nicene Creed, which among other things professed a belief in one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, the start of Christendom. Constantine began to utilize Christian symbols early in his reign, but still encouraged traditional Roman religious practices including sun worship. Between 324 and 330, Constantine built a new imperial capital at Byzantium on the Bosphorus. The city employed overtly Christian architecture, contained churches within the city walls, and had no pagan temples. In 330 he established Constantinople as the new capital of the Roman Empire. The city would gradually come to be seen as the center of the Christian world. The reign of Constantine established a precedent for the position of the Christian emperor in the Church. Emperors considered themselves responsible to God for the spiritual health of the subjects, and thus they had a duty to maintain orthodoxy. The emperor did not decide doctrine; that was the responsibility of the bishops. Rather, his role was to enforce doctrine, root out heresy, and uphold ecclesiastical unity. The emperor ensured that God was properly worshipped in his empire. What proper worship consisted of was the responsibility of the Church. This precedent would continue until certain emperors of the 5th and 6th centuries sought to alter doctrine by imperial edict without recourse to councils. Though even after this, Constantine's precedent generally remained the norm. Constantius II, Constantine's sons, banned pagan state religious sacrifices in 341 but did not close the temples. Although all state temples in all cities were ordered shut in 356, there is evidence that traditional sacrifices continued. When Gratian declined the position and title of Pontifex Maximus, his act effectively brought an end to the state religion because of the position's authority and ties within the administration. This ended state official practices but not the private religious practices, and consequently the temples remained open. There was not a total unity of Christianity, however, and Constantius II was an Arian who kept Arian bishops at his court and installed them in various sees, expelling the Orthodox bishops. Julian the Apostate, Constantius's successor, Julian, known in the Christian world as Julian the Apostate, was a philosopher who upon becoming emperor renounced Christianity and embraced a Neoplatonic and mystical form of paganism, shocking the Christian establishment. While not actually outlawing Christianity, he became intent on re-establishing the prestige of the old pagan beliefs and practices. He modified these practices to resemble Christian traditions such as the episcopal structure and public charity. Julian eliminated most of the privileges and prestige previously afforded to the Christian Church. His reforms attempted to create a form of religious heterogeneity by, among other things, reopening pagan temples, accepting Christian bishops previously exiled as heretics, promoting Judaism, and returning church lands to their original owners. However, Julian's short reign ended when he died while campaigning in the East. Christianity came to dominance during the reign of Julian's successors, Jovian, Valentinian I, and Valens. Nicaea Christianity becomes the state religion of the Roman Empire. Over the course of the 4th century, the Christian body became consumed by debates surrounding orthodoxy, i.e., which religious doctrines are the correct ones. By the early 4th century, a group in North Africa, later called Donatists, who believed in a very rigid interpretation of Christianity that excluded many who had abandoned the faith during the Diocletian persecutions, created a crisis in the Western Empire. A church synod, or council, was called in Rome in 313, followed by another in Arles in 314. The latter was presided over by Constantine while he was still a junior emperor. The councils ruled that the Donatist faith was heresy, and when the Donatists refused to recant, Constantine launched the first campaign of persecution by Christians against Christians. This was only the beginning of imperial involvement in the Christian theology. Christian scholars within the empire were increasingly embroiled in debates regarding Christology. Opinions were widespread, ranging from the belief that Jesus was entirely mortal to the belief that he was an incarnation of God that had taken human form. The most persistent debate was that between the Homoousian view and the Arian view. This controversy led to Constantine's calling a council meeting at Nicaea in 325. Christological debates raged throughout the 4th century, with emperors becoming ever more involved with the Church and the Church becoming ever more divided. The Council of Nicaea in 325 supported the Athanasian view. The Council of Rimini in 359 supported the Arian view. The Council of Constantinople in 360 supported a compromise that allowed for both views. The Council of Constantinople in 381 reasserted the Athanasian view and rejected the Arian view. Emperor Constantine was of divided opinions, but he largely backed the Athanasian faction. His successor Constantius II supported a semi-Arian position. Emperor Julian favored a return to traditional Roman Greek religion, but this trend was quickly quashed by his successor Jovian, a supporter of the Athanasian faction. In 380, Emperor Theodosius issued the Edict of Thessalonica, which established Christianity as the official state religion, specifically the faith established by the Council of Nicaea in 325. Theodosius called the Council of Constantinople in 381 to further refine the definition of orthodoxy. In 391, Theodosius closed all of the pagan temples and formally forbade pagan worship. These adhering state churches can be seen as effectively a department of the Roman state. All other Christian sects were explicitly declared heretical and illegal. In 385 came the first capital punishment of a heretic was carried out on Priscillian of Avila. Ecumenical Councils of the 4th century. The First Council of Nicaea and the First Council of Constantinople were a part of what would later be called the first 7 Ecumenical Councils, which spanned 400 years of church history. First Council of Nicaea. The First Council of Nicaea, held in Nicaea in Bithynia, convoked by Roman Emperor Constantine I in 325, was the first ecumenical conference of bishops of the Catholic Church and most significantly resulted in the first declaration of a uniform Christian doctrine. The purpose of the council was to resolve disagreements in the Church of Alexandria over the nature of Jesus in relationship to the Father, in particular, whether Jesus was of the same substance as God the Father or merely of similar substance. Alexander of Alexandria and Athanasius took the first position. The popular presbyter Arius, from whom the term Arian controversy comes, took the second. The council decided against the Arians overwhelmingly. Another result of the council was an agreement on the date of the Christian Passover, the most important feast of the ecclesiastical calendar. The council decided in favor of celebrating the resurrection on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the vernal equinox, independently of the Bible's Hebrew calendar, and authorized the Bishop of Alexandria to announce annually the exact date to his fellow bishops. The council was historically significant because it was the first effort to attain consensus in the Church through an assembly representing all of Christendom. With the creation of the Nicene Creed, a precedent was established for subsequent general councils to create a statement of belief and canons which were intended to become guidelines for doctrinal orthodoxy and a source of unity for the whole of Christendom, a momentous event in the history of the Church and subsequent history of Europe. The council was opposed by the Arians, and Constantine tried to reconcile Arius with the Church. Even when Arius died in 336, 1 year before the death of Constantine, the controversy continued, with various separate groups espousing Arian sympathies in one way or another. In 359, a double council of Eastern and Western bishops affirmed a formula stating that the Father and the Son were similar in accord with the Scriptures, the crowning victory for Arianism. The opponents of Arianism rallied, but in the First Council of Constantinople in 381 marked the final victory of Nicene orthodoxy within the empire, though Arianism had by then spread to the Germanic tribes, among whom it gradually disappeared after the conversion of the Franks to Catholicism in 496. First Council of Constantinople. The First Council of Constantinople approved the current form of the Nicene Creed as used in the Eastern Orthodox Church and Oriental Orthodox churches, but, except when Greek is used, with 2 additional Latin phrases in the West. The form used by the Armenian Apostolic Church, which is part of Oriental Orthodoxy, has many more additions. This fuller creed may have existed before the Council and probably originated from the baptismal creed of Constantinople. The Council also condemned Apollinarism, the teaching that there was no human mind or soul in Christ. It also granted Constantinople honorary precedence over all churches save Rome. The Council did not include Western bishops or Roman legates, but it was accepted as ecumenical in the West. Church Fathers. The Church Fathers, early Church Fathers, or Fathers of the Church, are the early and influential theologians and writers in the Christian Church, particularly those of the first 5 centuries of Christian history. The term is used of writers and teachers of the Church, not necessarily saints. Teachers particularly are also known as doctors of the Church, although Athanasius called them men of little intellect. Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers. Late antique Christianity produced a great many renowned Church Fathers who wrote volumes of theological texts, including Augustine of Hippo, Gregory Nazianzus, Cyril of Jerusalem, Ambrose of Milan, Jerome, and others. Some, such as John Chrysostom and Athanasius, suffered exile, persecution, or martyrdom from heretical Byzantine emperors. Many of the writings are translated into English in the compilations of Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers. Influential texts and writers between 325 and c. 500 include Athanasius, the Cappadocian Fathers, Ambrose, Chrysostom, Greek Fathers. Those who wrote in Greek are called the Greek Fathers. Athanasius of Alexandria. Athanasius of Alexandria was a theologian, Pope of Alexandria, and a noted Egyptian leader of the 4th century. He is best remembered for his role in the conflict with Arianism. At the First Council of Nicaea, Athanasius argued against the Arian doctrine that Christ is of a distinct substance from the Father. John Chrysostom. John Chrysostom, Archbishop of Constantinople, is known for his eloquence in preaching and public speaking. His denunciation of abuse of authority by both ecclesiastical and political leaders, the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, and his ascetic sensibilities. After his death he was given the Greek surname Chrysostomos, meaning golden mouth, rendered in English as Chrysostom. Chrysostom is known within Christianity chiefly as a preacher, theologian, and liturgist, particularly in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Outside the Christian tradition, Chrysostom is noted for 8 of his sermons which played a considerable part in the history of Christian anti-Semitism and were extensively used by the Nazis in their ideological campaign against the Jews. Latin Fathers. Those fathers who wrote in Latin are called the Latin Fathers. Ambrose of Milan. Ambrose of Milan was a bishop of Milan who became one of the most influential ecclesiastical figures of the 4th century. He is counted as one of the 4 original doctors of the Church. Monasticism. Desert Fathers. The Desert Fathers were early monastics living in the Egyptian desert. Although they did not write as much, their influence was also great. Among them are St. Anthony the Great and St. Pachomius. A great number of the usually short sayings is collected in the Apothemata Patrum. Early Christian monasticism. The first efforts to create a proto-monastery were by St. Macarius, who established individual groups of cells such as those at Caerleon. The intention was to bring together individual ascetics who, although pious, did not have the physical ability or skills to live a solitary existence in the desert. At Tabenna around 323, St. Pachomius chose to mold his disciples into a more organized community in which the monks lived in individual huts or rooms but worked, ate, and worshipped in shared space. Guidelines for daily life were created, and separate monasteries were created for men and women. This method of monastic organization is called cenobitic or community-based. All the principal monastic orders are cenobitic in nature. In Catholic theology, this community-based living is considered superior because of the obedience practiced and the accountability offered. The head of a monastery came to be known by the word for father in Syriac abba, in English abbot. Pachomius was called in to help organize others, and by one count by the time he died in 346 there were thought to be 3,000 such communities dotting Egypt, especially the Thebaid. Within the span of the next generation this number increased to 7,000. For the monasticism quickly spread out first to Palestine and the Judean desert, Syria, North Africa and eventually the rest of the Roman Empire. Eastern monasticism. Orthodox monasticism does not have religious orders as in the West, so there are no formal monastic rules. Rather, each monk and nun is encouraged to read all of the Holy Fathers and emulate the virtues. There is also no division between the active and contemplative life. Orthodox monastic life embraces both active and contemplative aspects. Gaul. The earliest phases of monasticism in Western Europe involved figures like Martin of Tours, who after serving in the Roman legions converted to Christianity and established a hermitage near Milan, then moved on to Poitiers where he gathered a community around his hermitage. He was called to become Bishop of Tours in 372, where he established a monastery at Marmothiers on the opposite bank of the Loire River, a few miles upstream from the city. His monastery was laid out as a colony of hermits rather than as a single integrated community. John Cassian began his monastic career at a monastery in Palestine and Egypt around 385 to study monastic practice there. In Egypt he had been attracted to the isolated life of hermits, which he considered the highest form of monasticism. Yet the monasteries he founded were all organized monastic communities. About 410 he established 2 monasteries near Marseille, one for men, one for women. In time these attracted a total of 5,000 monks and nuns. Most significant for the future development of monasticism were Cassian's institutes, which provided a guide for monastic life, and his conferences, a collection of spiritual reflections. Honoratus of Marseille was a wealthy Gallo-Roman aristocrat, who after a pilgrimage to Egypt, founded the monastery of Lerins, on an island lying off the modern city of Cannes. The monastery combined a community with isolated hermitages where older, spiritually proven monks could live in isolation. One Roman reaction to monasticism was expressed in the description of Lerins by Rutilius Namatianus, who served as prefect of Rome in 414, a filthy island filled by men who flee the light. Monks they call themselves, using a Greek name, because they will to live alone, unseen by man. Fortune's gifts they fear, dreading the harm, mad folly of a demented brain, that cannot suffer good, for fear of ill. Lerins became, in time, a center of monastic culture and learning, and many later monks and bishops would pass through Lerins in the early stages of the career. Honoratus was called to be Bishop of Arles and was succeeded in that post by another monk from Lerins. Lerins was aristocratic in character, as was its founder, and was closely tied to urban bishoprics. Defining Scripture. In 331, Constantine I commissioned Eusebius to deliver 50 Christian Bibles for the Church of Constantinople. Athanasius recorded Alexandrian scribes around 340 preparing Bibles. Little else is known, though there is plenty of speculation. For example, it is speculated that this may have provided motivation for canon lists, and that Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus are examples of these Bibles. Together with the Peshitta and Codex Alexandrinus, these are the earliest extant Christian Bibles. In order to form a New Testament canon of uniquely Christian works, Proto-Orthodox Christians went through a process that was complete in the West by the beginning of the 5th century. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, Egypt, in his Easter letter of 367, which was approved at the Nicene Council, listed the same 27 New Testament books as found in the Canon of Trent. The first council that accepted the present canon of the New Testament may have been the Synod of Hippo Regius in North Africa in 393. The Acts of this council, however, are lost. A brief summary of the Acts was read and accepted by the councils of Carthage in 397 and 419. Bishops. After legalization in 313, the Church inside the Roman Empire adopted the same organizational boundaries as the empire. Geographical provinces, called dioceses, corresponding to imperial governmental territorial division. The bishops, who were located in major urban centers as per pre-legalization tradition, thus oversaw each diocese as metropolitan bishops. The bishop's location was his seat, or see. The prestige of important Christian centers depended in part on their apostolic founders, from whom the bishops were therefore the spiritual successors according to the doctrine of apostolic succession. Constantine erected a new capital at Byzantium, a strategically placed city on the Bosphorus. He renamed his new capital Nova Roma, but the city would become known as Constantinople. The Second Ecumenical Council, held at the new capital in 381, elevated the See of Constantinople to a position ahead of the other chief metropolitan sees, except that of Rome, mentioning in particular the provinces of Asia, Pontus and Thrace. It decreed that the synod of each province should manage the ecclesiastical affairs of that province alone, except for the privileges already recognized for Alexandria and Antioch.